Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Carrie Vitucci, and I will serve as the moderator for today's webinar. On behalf of N4A's leadership, thank you for joining today's session, which serves as another installment of N4A's spring webinar series. Today's session is titled Goal-Based Study Hall Systems, an Infinite Model of Success. We are pleased to have with us today Alex Smith, who serves as the Learning Specialist at North Carolina Central University. As a reminder, if you have questions throughout the course of the live webinar, feel free to use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. I will moderate a brief question and answer session at the conclusion of today's webinar. At this time, I'd like to pass things off to Alex so we can kick off today's presentation. Alex, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Carrie. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Alex Smith, and I'm the Learning Specialist at North Carolina Central University. I also function as the academic advisor for women's tennis, men's golf, and football. I first of all just want to thank everybody for taking time out of their day. I appreciate everybody signing in. I know as we're approaching the end of the semester, it's a very critical time for us. We're working with our student athletes in multiple fashions. So thank you for signing in. I really, truly hope that you're able to gain or garner something from this presentation. It's been a long road. I was formerly a high school English teacher and coach, was able to get this position, thankfully, at North Carolina Central in September of 2019. And after a couple months of observing and learning, I was actually had this program become my brainchild in December of 2019. It was something that we then piloted in spring of 2020, which got interrupted by COVID, which we'll kind of talk about how those changes happened. But as we go in, I definitely want to also highlight some and recognize some of the successes we've had in the program, in addition to also being honest about some of the tweaks that we have needed to make throughout the program. So moving into the kind of objectives that I'd like to cover today, I would definitely like to evaluate best practice and maybe reconsider what study hall is and how can we maybe adapt it to our individual student athletes and to their learning styles. Can we allow them to begin to advocate for a certain amount of choice? Can we allow them to maybe actually start to get credit for things that maybe that they're already doing in terms of, instead of requiring them to come into our building? And can we also, you as the audience, maybe help supply some constructive feedback about this program that I've created? It's something that is still in the works. I definitely welcome the criticism, but I really also hope that you guys are able to take something from this as well and hopefully implement it into your programs as we approach a new calendar and academic year. So starting off, I know that we're going to open up the chat in a second because I really want to hear your guys' responses to this. This was actually a survey question that was given to student athletes, and they were asked, what do you think your academic athletic advisor would define as success for you? Now, this is definitely something that is very much flipped. We normally are thinking about, well, what would we consider as success for our student athletes? But I'm interested to maybe hear from you guys. What do you think that they think that we hope for? Because there is a top 3 responses here. And it's very interesting that I think that when we as advisors consider success for them, we often talk about graduation and beyond. But actually the #1 piece that happened is that athletes said that we consider them staying eligible as to be the top thing to be successful, which I think is a little bit of an issue, because when we start to tie things to eligibility, specifically when I talk to my student athletes about goal setting, when they just say that, oh, I just want to be eligible, we start to experience some issues, maybe with violations, some pressures about starting to get our student athletes across the finish line, but that's actually what they consider as the top piece of success. We move on to maybe getting a good GPA, which is a little bit better, I think. It's more along the lines of, okay, well, usually a good GPA means that they're learning something within their courses, but something that we're especially noticing now in a virtual environment is that sometimes they can kind of fake it until they make it in this virtual environment. So sometimes a good GPA doesn't necessarily mean that they're actually learning things in their courses. They could just be getting by, especially in this online environment. And finally, the graduation piece. And I think this is the most important. We obviously want to see our student athletes cross that stage. It is an indicator of success. But maybe what we're trying to get at here is that we need to start developing study hall programs, goals-based programs. When working with our caseloads, we have to start maybe focusing more on those soft skills, which allow our student athletes to maybe be marketable beyond graduation. Because too often we are bogged down by these 3-letter terms, by APR, by GSR, the graduation rates, by PTD. we start to get bogged down by these and we focus on getting to these numbers, but are we truly focusing on what our student athletes need in order to be successful? Are we providing a study hall system that is just one system that everybody is expected to follow regardless of ability levels? Or are we starting to maybe consider their choice in things and maybe start to think about how could we maybe help them advocate for themselves and actually get credit for things that are going to allow them to be successful, not only in the classroom, but also in beyond. So when I kind of talk about where I've kind of gotten this idea from, kind of give my research and my philosophical background, I took it from a case study of Weiss in 2011. And specifically as a learning specialist, I really thought it was important to look at student athletes with learning disabilities and differences. What are the things that they need in order to be successful? So Weiss actually took a look at a Division I learning assistance program, was able to find that these 4 bullet points were the most important thing and had to be there in order for a student athlete to be successful and to actually get to that point of graduation. A lot of us, I think, already have academic coaching in place. We already have one-on-one meetings with our student athletes that we're meeting with regularly to check in on them, make sure that they're doing their work, making sure that they're staying organized. That is something that I think all of our programs have. We have structured study hall and study groups. A lot of us obviously have spaces where our students can come to study, whether it's required or not, quiet, productive spaces, and we have that already in place. But what I found interesting is this college success strategies piece. Now, this is something that typically we might find in our first year seminar or in our first year experience courses. But how can we maybe translate that to allowing our student athletes to do these strategies and actually get credit for them? And then assistive technologies as well. So this is something that is more based off of our student athletes with learning differences, getting them set up with student accessibility services to get those. But we know that maybe sometimes accommodations don't necessarily mean or apply or work for all people. I think it's really important though, to when we're developing our systems, to consider our students that are maybe at the bottom a little bit, because we do have about 11% of undergraduates that have an identifiable educational impacting disability. Now, that doesn't mean that accommodations are often sought or even that they're put in place. And it's important, I think, to keep in mind that our struggling students are the ones that we maybe need to focus on the most, implement those within caseload strategies, and then actually maybe be able to work up and then implement those within study hall strategies. Can we help and reward these students for doing things that will allow them to be successful at the collegiate level? So from that research, I was able to kind of, again, this is our caseload. So this is maybe the 12 to 15 students that I work with, or some other staff members work with that are identified as at-risk student athletes. I developed this 3-prong approach. And these students need to hit each prong each week in order to be successful, to have reached their goal. So when we report to their coaches, they would have to do these 3 things in order to reach their goal. They would have to attend their academic coaching meetings. They would have to show evidence of an organizational tool, something that they're using to stay organized and on top of all their due dates, their assignments, their practices, their lifts. And they would have to show evidence of academic learning strategies. They would have to actually turn in 3 strategies per week that go above and beyond the course material that is actually provided by their professors and by their courses. And this 3-prong approach is something, again, that we think kind of directly correlates to these skills that allow them to become not only better students, but just better adults and better human beings. Because the key things that we're looking for is a student actually attending? If they can't attend, if they can't show up, then there's no way that they can be successful. They need to put in the work. They need to be put in the effort which is required. They need to have that strong work ethic, and they need to be willing to be adaptable. Week by week, things change. Lift times change, practices change, courses change. I mean, we have a syllabi at the beginning of the semester that we're looking at due dates, and we have our students try to record those due dates, but professors change courses, things happen. So they need to maybe shift week by week, and that's where the learning strategies come in. You might not be using the same strategies each week. If you have a test one week, then you might be utilizing a flashcard or a Quizlet strategy, as opposed to if you have a lot of reading one week, you might be using annotations. So you have to be willing to adapt and change as things change within the academic and the athletic worlds. So going a little bit more into depth about what we require based off of our weekly to-do lists. Obviously, at the beginning of the semester, we try to work with our students that are at risk, that are on our caseload, to look at their syllabi, look at their emails, look at Blackboard, and really break down what they need to do for the semester. And we allow them multiple options. So off to the right, On the top, you'll actually see an Excel file that was created by one of our interns, Ms. Christine Geve. She created this document that allows them to fill out their courses, their due dates, the specific assigns and tasks that they need to do. It's broken down by tab, so it goes week by week, day by day, and it also allows them a slot to maybe plan out what learning strategy they might use that week to help accomplish that task. On the bottom, we have a virtual option. I used to love Wunderlist. Now they converted it to Microsoft To-Do. It's not my favorite, but a lot of kids still like that virtual option because it allows them to sort by class, have favorites, have different lists, but it also will give them that ping or that reminder when something is due. And the virtual option is also great because that list can be directly shared with the coaches. So we can directly see their progress. We can see when they're checking off and completing assignments. The Excel file is something that would send to us on a weekly basis. So they would share with us so we could then click on the next tab and see what their progress is like. So we require all students to have this weekly to-do list option. If they don't, then they did not meet their goal for that week. So some examples, some people, myself included, are a little bit more physical, a little bit more kinesthetic. So this is an example of a student that is at our university that utilizes the weekly to-do list through a physical planner. They like to color code, they like to physically check things off or highlight as they're doing things. This would be evidence of something, obviously an organizational tool, and they would receive credit for that. This is a more specified example of an Excel tracker. So we could see that the courses are labeled, due dates are labeled, they obviously have their assignments in there, but a lot of our students like to use color coding to definitely see their progress. So green means it's something that I did. So you marked it green and you send it to the academic coach. We can feel comfortable that a student did that assignment. Yellow is something, again, as a caution color. So we could see that this student in the English course is supposed to be writing their intro or their one body paragraph. And when they marked it yellow, that means that they are struggling with it. They want extra help. So this can definitely guide our next academic session or our next academic meeting. It could mean a referral to a tutor or to the writing center. And red. Red means I did not do it. I missed it. I lost it. I didn't get it. So we actually find that a lot of students are, obviously we can double check this in our meetings. We have students to share, have students that can share their screens. We have found that a lot of students are very honest with this because it allows us obviously to see where they're at. And we can definitely advocate for obviously, hopefully at the end of the semester, that the majority of their Excel tracker is going to be green. And then finally, our Microsoft to-do list. And this student is utilizing different lists for different classes. We can see that they're currently in a family policy class. They have all their due dates listed for the entire semester. They're able to get those reminders to their phone. And they're also, again, able to have the satisfaction of checking things off as they happen within the semester. So specifically, when we piloted this in spring 2020, all of our caseload students were required to have a to-do list, whether it be a planner, whether it be in some sort of tracker online, or whether it be a virtual option that could be directly used by their computer and by their phone. And then we arrive at the learning strategy piece. Obviously, on the right-hand side, we have our weekly to-do list. That's something that we already talked about. We have some other strategies to obviously list them. I don't want to spend a lot of time. This isn't, I guess, a learning strategies presentation where I'm working with everybody or talking about these strategies. What is important to know is that learning strategies, though, are something that we're requiring our students to do that requires an interaction that goes beyond the course material. So a student, they did their quiz, great. I've had a number of times where students have texted me, have talked to me, and been like, I got an 85 on my quiz. I'm like, that's great, congratulations, but that's not a learning strategy because that's something that you are already required to do by your professor. It is something or anything that they can do where they are not initially receiving credit. So it could be creating flashcards for a quiz. It could be completing a study guide. It could be utilizing a tutor on campus. If you're required to read chapters, you can take notes on the chapter. You could pick out a specific line and make a connection. You could provide summaries, provide reactions. How did you feel about something specifically? We're trying to encourage our students to have more interactions with the material than just when they learn in class. And they can obviously also reuse strategies as well. If there's someone who really likes a particular strategy, they can reuse that for different courses if that's what works for them. This is where student choice comes into play. All of our students are different. Some of them like to reflect a little bit more. Some of them like to use flashcards a little bit more. Whatever works for them, and all of our academic coaches are also trained on these, they can provide suggestions. And then eventually we really hope that our student athletes are making these choices for themselves based off of what works for them and what works for their course schedule. And here are some examples. So this is a student that I work with. Too often right now in math and science courses, well, the science ones like physics that require calculations to be done, we have my math lab. We have these virtual things that are being used. However, students are just putting in the answers and then they're not really talking about it anymore. They're not interacting with material anymore. So this is a student that's in a physics course that is getting credit for showing her work. She's color coding to show the different steps. She's working through the problems. We can see that diagrams are being used. When she writes these now, she can actually go back to these and she uses this as a study tool because she actually provides her own notes on the right-hand side to explain what she's doing in her own words. Too often we have had times where people do math problems and they look back and they're like, I'm not sure what I did. So this student is actually getting credit for showing their work in math. We have other students that maybe take notes, but how can they do it in a more meaningful way? They can create images, they can create symbols that help to reflect. Some people are a little bit more visual, so they turn their notes into diagrams or pictures that will help them to remember important concepts. Cornell note strategy. Obviously, we have things like notes, like we see kids who take notes in class and it's just bullet point after bullet point after bullet point. But maybe how are you interacting with that material afterwards? Are you coming up with key concepts or ideas based off of those notes? Are you summarizing or reflecting on the material? Are you actually hypothesizing possible test questions that your professor could ask you based off of the material? Annotating. Are we interacting with the material as we talked about? Am I looking up unique terms that I do not understand? Am I actually providing summaries of how I understand material or what the author's purpose was? You can actually go back and interact with that material again multiple times by looking at your notes and annotations rather than having to reread the entire thing. Or using, again, for our visual, something like a concept map or a mind map based off of the material. These are all examples of learning strategies that our student athletes have utilized within this program. Because the more that they interact with it, the more effort that they put into the material, the more that material is going to be reinforced. This diagram on the left-hand side is a great job of showing with this dark black line right here that over time, if a student does not interact with material, they are going to lose that information. If you don't use it, you're going to lose it. At the initial point, I learned it. Okay, I understand it. But over the course of 31 days, and I know that these numbers are cut off a little bit, you're only going to remember somewhere between 20 to 30% of that material in about a month, which is usually maybe when the next test is going to be, if you do not interact or have a repetition with that material. And we can see that each time that you repeat or you interact with the piece of material from the course, that amount that you remember is going to go up. And specifically, something that I talk about with my students a lot is a rule of 3. After you learn something, after you talk about something with a professor, you need to have at least 3 repetitions afterwards in order to have that information committed to long-term memory. But also something that's very important to consider is, what are they doing with these repetitions? Because they could be interacting with the material multiple times, but are they doing it in a high impact way or in a low impact way? Because those high impact ways, as we kind of talked about, which the learning strategies are something that are going to help you remember things long term, like hypothesizing test questions. For example, if you have a history test and you have to go through and you have to remember something about the Harlem Renaissance, are you remembering the who, what, when, where, whys, and hows of the Harlem Renaissance? Are you hypothesizing or trying to think of those questions? Well, what is the Harlem Renaissance? Where did it take place? When did it take place? What year? Why was the Harlem Renaissance so important in revitalizing Black culture in the Black community? As opposed to sometimes, a lot of times, I ask students how they study, and they just say, well, I look at the PowerPoints or I reread the chapter from the textbook. That necessarily isn't going to, it's lower effort. It's not as hard to do, and it's not going to help lead to that reinforcement, which will hopefully then lead to success when we experience quizzes and tests later on. And sometimes right now we're experiencing again that students are able to get around it because of in an online environment, they have more time, or a professor isn't watching them as they're taking quizzes and tests. But we all know that as things starting to open back up again, as the fall semester starts to approach, we need to start drilling in these habits now and reinforcing them now, or else when they get back into the classroom and they're required to sit down and take a quiz or a test, and they have not learned how to study effectively for it, and they've not been rewarded for effectively studying for it, then we could start to see some drops in our students' grades. And I have I have to be honest here. We have experienced pushback, and I know some people are probably thinking about, well, how are you getting students to buy into this program? We have experienced some pushback, if we're being completely honest, because students maybe haven't learned how to effectively study before. They haven't learned how to effectively take notes. They haven't ever been required or really been encouraged to interact with the material more than one time. Now, is that something that is just a part of them? Can they just never study? Or is it something that can be learned over time? Because if I'm being perfectly honest, like I am somebody that is not good at art. Like I can't draw. If you ask me to draw a lion, I will draw what's on the left-hand side. That's just what I am. But if I'm being honest, have I ever taken an art class before? Well, yeah, I took the elementary and I took the middle school classes, but have I actually gone out of my way to take art lessons? Have I actually ever been committed to making that change if it's something that I want to do? Maybe if I commit to making that change, if I decide that this is not a part of who I am, it's something that I can actually learn. I could learn how to be a good test taker. I can learn how to effectively study. My lion photo might change. I might become somebody that has become skilled in that aspects, because forming habits are difficult at first. It is going to be hard, but we need to reinforce those repetitions and interactions in order for our student athletes to be successful. Monotonous things that we just do every day now, like brushing our teeth or putting on our seatbelt, were once something that we did not know, but over time we kept repeating them, and now they just become of who we are. They're just something that we innately do every day. That's not to say that taking notes in a class or writing flashcards or going through and actually utilizing a tutor can't be something that you normally do or becomes repetitions. It's just something that you need to keep doing and you can't give up on it. So this program, this three-prong approach, where we require students to come in and attend meetings, where we required them to show evidence of an organizational tool, and where we required them to submit 3 learning strategies per week, was something, again, we piloted with our football caseload, to be specific, in the spring of 2020. And this is our results here on the right-hand side. And it's something that I am proud of. It's something that our university and our staff is proud of, because really the numbers show for themselves. You look at here at the top, the percent compliance is the percent of the time that they accomplished all 3 prongs. So each week, these students here, 1, 2, 3, and 4, that are 100% compliant, they did all of their attendance, they did their organizational tool, and they did 3 learning strategies every single week. And then we obviously go down the list. And what we did was we compared their cumulative GPA, what they came into that semester with, as compared to the GPA that they actually achieved within that semester that they went through this program. And because of spring 2020, because we had things that obviously shut down in March because of COVID, we actually compared it to their pre-pass fail numbers, not when they were actually given the choice to maybe throw away some of their grades. What we can see here is that the colors are pretty consistent. Students that were compliant, above 80% compliance, experienced a huge increase in their GPA within that semester. And as we can see, the bottom, the students that were not compliant experienced a drop in the GPA in that semester. The students that bought into our program, that bought into the philosophy that we're trying to put into there, did better. And then the ones that did not went down, or they suffered a little bit. But if we're being completely honest now, as we went through the next semester, some of these students obviously stayed on our caseload. Some of them departed, maybe some of them entered the transfer portal, but we had 10 students who returned for the next semester, went through the same 3-prong approach, went through the same program, and our numbers are a little bit different this time. Honestly, they were a little bit all over the place. Obviously, we had a student that was 100% compliant that experienced a huge increase. They had their first 4.0 in the semester. But as on the bottom here, we actually had our least compliant student who actually experienced almost a 1-point increase in their GPA. Now, I think there is something to say where if a student is exposed around something long enough, it just starts to again become innate. Just because they're not doing the work or not attending or not turning in their strategies doesn't mean that that's not something that's happening. As a high school teacher, we could obviously realize that over time, some students might not be doing the work, but that doesn't mean that they're not learning. But it was, I guess, a little bit more disheartening to see that the numbers weren't as consistent as they were in spring 2020. But when we looked at it, this is for a number of reasons. Virtual fatigue. Since March of 2020, we have been having online meetings with our students. there is something to be said about the interaction that you can have one-on-one with a person when you're able to sit down with them and teach them these strategies. And this is the same thing within their classes itself. I mean, professors have started to say, well, just here's the stuff on Blackboard. This is what you have to do to learn. This is what you have to be successful. But the teaching quality almost has started to kind of suffer as people have felt more fatigued when they're not able to have that face-to-face interaction. Life has happened. To be honest, one of the students on this list experienced the loss of a grandfather at COVID. Other people have had family problems back home and quarantine. We've had a number of our students that have been in and out of quarantine. We have a high amount of student athletes that really require technology that we loan out to them, or that we offer through our library, or that we obviously are able to provide for them, or in their computer labs and the residence halls. And when they are tested and they immediately have to go into quarantine because they've had a close contact or if they've tested positive, we had a number of students that were out of luck with technology for almost a week or 2 weeks at a time. And this happened multiple times in the semester. So without that lack of consistency with meetings, with being in quarantine, with experiencing things back home, I think it's fair to say that some of these students had an off semester, and that's okay. Because we've also had new students that came into the program in the fall of 2020. Our new freshmen that were at risk or moderately at risk that we assigned to caseload, and our new transfers were extremely compliant with the program. We could see that nobody was below 70%. And I think it's easier to get buy-in when somebody's coming in fresh. We have experienced some issues with returning athletes because they've already known what the system was. They're like, well, I know I have to come into the building. I have to get 6 to 8 hours or whatever it was. And so honestly, some of them found ways to shirk the system to get around it. So when somebody's coming in new, it's easier because they don't know anything different. And I think that's why we had a lot of our students that were able to buy in and do well as freshmen and transfers, because they didn't know different. And they were really taking us at our word that this system was going to work. Now, as spring 2020 has now come upon, or spring 2021, sorry, has come upon us, as me and one of my fellow academic coaches, Miss Lucy Masons, has noted, the time demands now have started to pick back up again. Our football team opted out of the season, but now they're back in weights. They have practices. They're in the midst of spring ball. They're starting to have these competing and conflicting interests with academics and athletics that they've never had before. And they're having to make choices. So as those time demands start to crop up, some of them have started to slack on their strategies now when they maybe weren't doing so before. And COVID. And that could be all of the things that I talked about on the last slide, whether it be still have kids that are being put in quarantine. The fatigue, again, we have more in-person options than we did before, but we still have a lot of professors that are teaching virtually. So when you've had a whole year of this system, it is tiring when you have to kind of log into these situations and you're not getting that teaching quality that you think you deserve when you're coming in at the college level. So what that has really led to right now is that was everything I talked about was with our caseload, our high at-risk student athletes. What we had to do, though, was then actually take that and spin it into a study hall system for a greater amount of our student athletes in the fall of 2020. And this is something that was rolled out maybe a little bit too soon, but it's something that we had to roll out because of COVID. Students were not allowed in our buildings. We had to keep a certain number of them out. We could only have a certain amount of them passing through at a certain time because of safety protocols. So we had to adjust our study hall system. And our study hall system at Central is something that has participants that are freshmen. Freshmen are required to be in our study hall system for a full calendar year. Transfers have to come in for their initial semester. And any student athlete that is below a 2.5 GPA are a part of our study hall system. Freshmen or transfers are able to graduate from that requirement as long as they have above the 2.5 after the semester or the year that they participate. And normally, as I said before, these students would come directly into our building and sign in for about 6 to 8 physical hours required per week. But when our building is shut down, when we don't have people in the building or in the offices, we had to adjust. And I had to take what I used in spring 2020 with my caseload and apply it to our greater number of student athletes. So each week, those student athletes, those new freshmen, those transfers, and those below a 2.5 would have to send to their academic coach evidence of an organizational tool each week and their 3 chosen learning strategies for the week. And this would serve as credit as opposed to hours. And this is them reaching their goal. If they sent the tool, if they sent the strategies, they would reach their goal for the week. This is their new goal. It's not to reach a certain number of hours, it's to complete a certain number of strategies and to stay organized. And we would give them credit for that. Because if I'm being perfectly honest, I do think it's very important to note that learning occurs outside of the classroom and it doesn't occur within a specific time. Students study on their own, they study in small groups, and that's perfectly okay. And I know at bigger universities, sometimes the academic center is kept open longer, but our university, it maybe opens around 8 or 9 a.m. and it closes at 5 p.m. What if you are a student that likes to work later at night? This system allows them the ability to be able to do that at a certain time. If they like to study at 10 or 11 o'clock, then they can do that at 10 or 11 o'clock, and then they can send that evidence to their academic coach at the end of the week. Because the system, again, also reflects upon those three key ideas or strategies or attitudes that I talked about at the beginning. That we're trying to develop a strong work ethic, that we're trying them to get to exude effort beyond what's required of them. You don't get a pat on the back for just doing what you're expected to do. Let's go above and beyond. And let's build on those skills rather than maybe just focusing on the GPA or the grade. We are more satisfied when you're showing qualitative work than, okay, you got an A, but well, what did you learn about though in order to get that A? How did you accomplish the A? Did you do it in the right way? Did you take the right path for it? So these are the pros and cons that I felt like our university and our student athletes have experienced within our department because of this study hall program. We've been able to greatly reduce traffic for sure. That was something in fall that we had to do because of safety protocols, but now we're finding that we're still able to keep those numbers down because of a number of our students are able to do their studying on their own time and be able to get credit for it. Low-risk student athletes that come in and incoming student athletes are the ones that have benefited the most. Our small teams especially, tennis and golf have done really well with this program, but even some of our larger teams, softball and baseball, have done really well. High performing athletes, those low risk athletes, are the ones that seem to be doing the best. And that's not to say that every program will have them though. We have obviously some football players and some track players that are doing really well with this program. So it's maybe not fair to have one generalized program for an entire sports team when different athletes might be in different places in their development. As a learning specialist, it's allowed me to branch off and provide more programming and developing opportunities. I've been able to speak to more students across different levels about study strategies, about keeping organized. And it's also really led to, I think, a better work ethic. But on the cons on the other side, we've already talked about the fatigue and the burnout over time. It's something that maybe we have experienced a certain level of drop off. Our high risk athletes, it's a struggle. I mean, if we're struggling to get students to be able to go through and even do the assignments that's required of them, then how can we expect them to do flashcards each week, or how can we expect them to take notes when we can barely get them to be able to do the work that is expected of them? And again, those returning student athletes that maybe had already experienced a system before that they were used to, and now something is new and incoming, they maybe experienced a little bit of resistance. Another reason I think though in spring 2020 why we experienced such success is that I was able to offer this stuff in person and offer in-person programming. Part of that fatigue is now I've tried to offer strategy sessions to people online, and people are just over and they're sick of online. And I think it's something that if you can actually offer training on different strategies, how to effectively take notes, how to study effectively, and if you can offer those programs in person to your student athletes, it would experience a higher level of success. And I can say that quantitatively, this program can be a little bit overloading based on team size. So for example, like I think softball last semester has 15, 16 students. If you're getting all of them every week at a certain time, sending their strategies and sending their organizational tools, it can be a lot for an academic coach to sort through. We currently have a staff of 5, and we only have a couple interns, one specifically that works with student development and one that works more on the learning specialist side, when we used to have a stronger group of interns or more interns. So what I can say as a possible solution for this is if you actually have a crop of interns or mentors on campus, this can be one of their roles. If this is something that you're interested in, you can have these mentors or have these interns sort through the learning strategies each week, train them on it, and make sure that they're turning them in correctly. We don't want them turning in things and then turning in things from week to week that are the same. they're basically reusing strategies, but it's literally they're turning in the same strategy. We don't want that. And we don't want them to be doing them incorrectly. We want this to be a learning process. So we understand at the beginning of the semester, it might be a little bit harder as you're getting into it, but over time, we're hope that you're turning in that qualitative work that we're expecting. Because really what it boils down to is choice. And that's, I think, that the conclusion that we've come to it is that, yes, we have student athletes that come in at risk and we're going to automatically assign them to work with an academic coach or a learning specialist. Based off of their academic records, that's the choice that we're making. However, for everybody else, we need to give them an option. And I think that we have experienced a lot of students that are happy that they finally have that option. We have hours-based or we have goals-based for those student athletes. Right now for football, we're running an in-person study hall on Mondays and Thursdays. We have some high-performing football players that just prefer to come in to have a quiet, productive place to study, and that's what they want to do. They want to get credit by coming in each week and sitting down and doing work and getting the hours, which is the system that we had before, and that's perfectly okay. We also have several students that are happy or feel successful in the fact that they are able to do things outside of our building, outside of our prying eyes, and do things, but still be able to get credit for it. That if you're already somebody that is taking notes effectively, if you're already somebody that is doing these things that we're talking about, why not reward them and give them credit for it? But also, why not also develop programs that will allow these students to get these strategies to be able to build themselves up academically over time? So for those students that we actually go through, we're thinking about giving them the choice as they come in, those incoming student athletes. Well, what way would you like to be measured? Would you rather have the goals or the objectives where you're coming in and you're getting credit for staying organized, you're getting credit for using these study or college success strategies, or would you just rather come into our building? I think that we've actually had students, a fair amount of students that have chosen one or the other. We haven't had an overwhelming amount that have particularly said, oh, I want this or I want this. I think that based off of how a student learns, and we get into their learning styles a little bit, we've had students that have really cropped up and chose one or the other, and I think they feel appreciative of that fact. Because when we break it down, and this is something that my boss and supervisor, Mr. Quadro Steele, kind of preached to me into our department when I came in to this profession, is we need to look at the finite and the infinite in this system. The finite is something that we are governed by so much, honestly, as people that work in athletics and academics, that there's so many rules and objectives that people are required. You're told to do this. You're told to reach this certain standard. I think what we're trying to do with this system, in this infinite system, is focus more on the holistic humanistic experience of our student athletes on campus. We're trying to, again, hopefully allow them to become better adults, get credit for being here, get credit for putting in the effort and going above and beyond, getting the credit for being adaptable, for showing that you're paying attention, that you're building up these skills that will allow you to get to that next level. It is easy to fake it when you're at the lower levels, when you're in the 1,000, the 2,000 level courses. We have student athletes that are doing it right now. They're not doing their strategies, or they're doing them a little bit half credit wise. And then it's eventually going to come back to bite them over time. Yes, you might be able to be okay in a 1,000 level course. When you get to those upper level courses, you need to have these strategies a part of you innately. You need to be able to be consistent, work on them over time, and then it will become a part of you. Because too often we play the short game. We experience a student athlete and they're struggling. They're only passing 2 out of their 5 classes. They need to pass 3 to be eligible. We forgive and we get off of these infinite strategies, and then we switch to the finite. We get into that mode of just trying to help them get to the finish line. Then over time, if we keep playing the short game, are we truly helping them develop over their time on our campus? We're trying to hopefully play the long game here. And the system has been now in place for about a year, and we're still actively trying to tweak it. And that's why I'm so happy that I was able to give this presentation and hopefully get feedback from you guys about, well, what do you think maybe went wrong in fall of 2020? What do you think would work for your university? What do you think would work for our university? I'm definitely looking forward to that feedback, because we are the players in this system within this greater NCAA. But I think if enough of us try to adapt and become infinite, focus more on the holistic experience, then maybe the system itself will have to change. We've already had conversations about APR, maybe something that does it or does not reflect how a university is actually learning and how our student athletes are learning. I think if we start to treat our students less as cogs in the machine, if we start to stick and encourage these infinite strategies, then hopefully over time we'll start to see a greater amount of that real success, not that the facade or that mirage that we sometimes see when student athletes are just able to consistently just kind of fight their way to the finish line. And really, that is the end. I know that we're going to be moving to questions sooner, a question and answer period. This is, again, just kind of the risk assessment piece that I use as something that I kind of stuck at the end here. I know that we're going to be able to share my presentation. I'm also somebody that is completely open to sharing the other presentations that I've given on my campus about learning strategies, about organization, about test preparation. This is just the system that I use for incoming student athletes to project that low, moderate, and high risk. I know I talked a lot about low and high risk student athletes and how they either did or did not enjoy or did not work within the system. So that's, I guess, me just kind of show you how I assess that risk as it happens. And that will obviously be a part of the presentation if you're interested in it or interested in the PowerPoint. And there is my information again. So obviously feel free to email me if you have any questions. I know that we're probably going to be moving on to, I saw some people putting some questions and chats in there. So I look forward to hearing those.
Alex, thank you for your insight and for sharing some great information with today's participants. At this time, we do have a few minutes to take questions from people in the audience. As a reminder, please feel free to use that Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen to pose a question to Alex. We will attempt to answer as many as we can before the top of the hour. So Alex, our first question relates to buy-in. So how do you present this change in structure to coaching staffs to get buy-in?
So I think that there is a certain amount of issue, I guess, because I think coaches really kind of feel like, well, I want to be able to track my student athletes' whereabouts. I want to be able to have this very finite system of hours, because if I need to provide a punishment, then it's very easy to say, well, either they did or did not. But what I really think is important about the buy-in is just really going back to that level of choice for student athletes. We need to encourage and allow them to be able to, have the option to study when and where is convenient to them. So time and location is extremely important. We can't necessarily force them into these situations, allow them to do what works for them in a way that is meaningful to them. But then over time, if they show that they're not capable of it, then that's why we have the hours-based system that is available. We have had some student athletes that have struggled in the goals-based, and then so then they're moved to the hours-based. We have the study hall, the physical study hall that is there and that is available to them. So to coaches, I think it's really important for them just to realize that student athletes learn differently. And I think the system allows them a certain aspect of choice, but if they show that they can't honor that choice, then we have the old system that also works for some of our student athletes as well. And some of our high performing too. It just really depends. Do you need somebody to monitor you or not? Do you need to, I guess, just if you're someone who likes to study a different way, then we just want to reward them for what they're already doing or what they do well and how they do it.
To follow up on that, how have your coaches received this program? How has their support been? What was their reception like?
So specifically, obviously, just going back to the caseload with football, I think honestly, it really just goes, if the results show for themselves, then they're happy. It's so if they're doing well, then they don't really have any questions about the program, as opposed to if they start messing up. We have progress reports, like professors twice in a semester will send the grades. And then obviously at that point, if we're starting to experience some negativity or some slide, then we bring that up to coaches and we maybe figure out that, okay, maybe the goals base isn't the best for them. Maybe we need to adjust and put them in the hours based system. I also think that it's something, so we're talking about coaches here. Definitely just lost my train of thought there for a second. Oh, okay. Here's where I was going with it. It's interesting. People are talking about buy-in. Unfortunately, actually, our baseball team is no longer going to be sponsored next year. But what's actually interesting when talking to our academic coach, Mr. Ed Reed, is that our baseball players are still turning in their strategies. So we're actually anticipating that a lot of student athletes would be like, well, I'm going to be transferring. Why do I have to keep buying into this university? But they continue to turn them in. So I think our baseball coach has really bought into the system because he saw that it was necessary. And I think a lot of them have also bought in because they realized that the whole idea of a whole group of students being so in close contact is just something that's no longer available anymore. So they have bought in because it is a safe system, something that a student is able to do on their own time, socially distant. So I think that a lot of our coaches have also appreciated that, whether they liked it or not. It's something that has had to happen because we've had to keep these safety protocols in place.
Alex, related to the structure, how many people do you have working within this program? And then what would your advice be for staff that have constraints on just staffing in general?
So I think we hit those constraints for sure. So we have a staff of 5, but those that kind of work directly, I think all 5 of us have teams though that we work with. So we have individuals that are all within the program. So I will say that is an issue, and it's something that we're trying to work with. We are trying to get a greater crop of interns for the fall because we want to delegate that to them, because we know that we all have different jobs. I'm a learning specialist and I'm a coach. Someone's a student development coordinator and an academic coach. Everybody has their multiple roles, so it's really hard for us to be able to sort through those on a weekly basis and make sure that they're doing well. I will say that we've had some instances where we look at the strategies and we're like, check them off as they're going, like, yes, you did it. So I think that it really requires a strong intern and mentor core in order to work if you're going to do it. Now, it was very easy for me as working with golfers and tennis players. Both of those teams are under 10 people. It's very easy for me to go through those on a Friday and take a half hour and look at their strategies. A little bit harder when you get to your softball, your baseball, your tracks, and your footballs. I think you need a strong intern and mentor core to make that happen.
Going off of that, how do you set up the physical study hall space for those who chose the in-person hours approach?
So we have an auditorium. So within our rec complex, we had an auditorium. So, and this was specifically for our football. So actually football is only current one that has an in-person study hall option is football. So we actually have a constraint on the percentage of students. I think we have to cap it at 20% or whatever it was. So we only have about 20 students. And we also have a variety of day options. We have a Monday and we have a Thursday because we know that practices and course schedules can be a little bit of that way. So we've had to make sure that students can maintain that 6-foot space. So we do have auditoriums that we're able to reserve at a certain time each week for that to work. I know that our basketball has done the virtual Zoom study halls and breakout rooms, which that's worked for that specific team. So basketball actually doesn't follow this program because all those basketball players meet specifically with our academic coach, Ms. Kia Robinson, and she holds those virtual study halls. So again, though, it advocates for student choice and what's best for that team. Like that works for her team, but that doesn't work for my women's tennis team, which doesn't work for our football team. So we almost have this hybrid system that really depends on the student athletes and the teams that you have.
Going off of another question regarding in-person study hall, are they paired with someone or are they just independent during that session?
So we have, I run the Thursday one. Ms. Lucy Mason runs the Monday one. So we have a monitor that is there. Specifically with those students, we will check in with them at the beginning and ask what they're going to be working on. And then we will then at the end check in and make sure, and they'll have to provide proof that they've actually done something during that time. And then we keep a running tally because we've had some students that in the Monday study hall have done something, and on Thursday they try to play it off like they did the same thing on Monday. So we keep a running list and Excel file with what they've accomplished during each of those times. So just like our ones in the goals-based are being held accountable for their learning strategies and having to do something each session, so are the people in our in-person study hall. Because what we did experience in past semesters was they would actually check in the bottom of our building and they might check in and leave, or they might check in and watch Netflix. So we're really encouraging systems that will provide that qualitative work and double check and make sure that they're actually doing things that are either going to help them for their class or that is being directly graded by their class.
So following up on that, I know you just mentioned an Excel sheet. One of our participants asked, how do you track all of this information? Do you use a specific program to track their weekly completed goals and long-term data?
No specific program. I just created an Excel file with a tab for each team. It's shared between all of our academic coaches. So each week you can go in and you can put the number of learning strategies that they've completed, a yes or no to the organizational tool. It will populate as a green or a red. Green means yes, they did. Red means no, they did not. And it also gives a space for you to describe the strategies as they do them, which is again something that we're just being honest about, is that sometimes over time, they might be reusing strategies. So it's hard again to be like, well, did they do this? They did chapter 2 last week, but did they just turn in chapter 2 again, or did they do chapter 3? So it allows you a space to put notes. No fancy program, just we really like to use Excel and different tabs and color coding to be able to make it easy, and it's shared among all of our coaches so we can see it at all times.
So transitioning back to programming, does attendance count on the three-prong approach? Does it only apply to attendance, to academic coaching meetings, or does that include study hall tutoring classes?
So tutoring is not required. We do not at our university have, our tutoring is offered directly through the university and academic enrichment services. So we unfortunately do not have tutors that are specifically there for athletes. So as far as a three-prong approach, that applies to our caseload system. And yes, one of those prongs is they need to show up. And then they have the organizational tool, and then they have the learning strategies. So that is one area of our system. If you're a part of the goals-based system, which is the study hall program, then you just have the two prongs. You just have the organizational tool and you have the 3 learning strategies. If you are part of the study hall system, which is the hours-based, you just simply go based off of the hours that you have achieved. So yes, you attended study hall. Yes, you worked on something in study hall. So we actually have a caseload report that we send out, which is kind of where I got all of this from. But we also have a study hall report. And actually, when we send that out to coaches, it's a simple yes or no. Whether they're hours based or whether they are goals based, we have those separate files. Then we go through each week and just send a very simple document to coaches saying yes or no. Yes, they met their goal. No, they did not meet their goal. And for study hall, yes, they met their goal could either mean the organizational tool plus the learning strategies, or it could be the 6 to 8 hours per week.
Going off of the organizational tools, we had an attendee ask, when discussing learning strategies and organizational tools, do you consider their to-do list to be their organizational tool, or do you require it to be a planner?
So the organizational tool is the separate piece, and sometimes that one's maybe a little bit easier to track because they can actually insert all of their due dates at the beginning of the semester and send it to us and then get credit for it. Because obviously we really encourage them to update them over time. So we might actually check that. But yeah, the organizational tool is separate from that. Can you repeat the second part of the question?
I believe it was just speaking about, does it have to be a to-do list, or can it be a plan?
Oh, it could be any of the 3. It could be, we have students that utilize the physical planner, they utilize the Excel tracker, or they utilize the virtual option, which is the Microsoft to-do list. So any of the 3 can apply. It doesn't necessarily have to be physical or virtual, whatever works best for them and their mode of studying and remembering and organizing.
And then to jump off that as well, do you combine that kind of organizational tool with any kind of reports you send to the department or coaches?
So we actually have had situations, I think, where it depends, where if you're doing the Microsoft to-do list, you can absolutely share it directly with a coach. We've done that with football. We've done it with position coaches. I know that our basketball does it as well. So then coaches can directly see what they have and what they haven't done. So we do send weekly reports to coaches that go into a lot of depth about what they've been working on, what's been done, what hasn't been done, what are future due dates and assignments. But it really depends on the person, honestly. Some of our high-risk student athletes were more likely to share those lists with their coaches, because we do find times where our coaches might actually have extra meetings or extra study hall sessions that they need to see what's going on to make sure that they're working on something. But for like my tennis or golfers or softball players, we typically don't share those organizational tools with their coaches unless their coaches request it or want it.
So we have another question regarding just crafting these learning strategies. For incoming students with low academic abilities, they often struggle crafting learning strategies because they lack basic study skills. How much time do you spend going over these when you are preparing them to do this model?
So typically the high risk student athletes are the ones that we are going to assign to us and caseload. So in those one-on-one academic meetings, we might focus on in the beginning of the semester, because things might not be due for the first 2 or 3 weeks. We really focus and own in on that organization and those learning strategy pieces. We have some students that take the LASI, that take learning style assessments, and then they learn more about themselves, like, okay, I'm a kinesthetic learner, maybe this strategy is going to be the best for me, or maybe this is. So with those high risk student athletes, we do a lot more of direction and hand holding at the beginning to maybe guide them to what strategies are going to be the best for them, as opposed to our low risk student athletes or moderates, which are the ones that we maybe can't meet with them one-on-one, but they've probably already learned these before in high school and have already been utilizing them. So why not give them credit and reward them for doing so? Because student athletes have a lot going on. And if they're already doing this, if they're already doing it in class, like a lot of our students already take notes in class, give them credit for it, because we know how busy the life is of a student athlete is. And then they can maybe use that more time to study for additional classes instead of requiring them physically to come into an office or a building when they really don't need to. Reduce that traffic if you can.
Alex, can you speak on what the maybe consequences are if they don't compete their weekly goals and strategies?
I feel like there's sometimes more consequences with us as academic coaches. We tend to frown on that a little bit, and we'll talk to them about it. And hopefully, I mean, we've had situations where they haven't been doing their learning strategies, and an academic coach made a choice to be like, well, you know what, now you're in person. You're done. You've had multiple opportunities. I have given you time to talk about these strategies. I have offered to do these strategies with you in our meetings. We are harping on it. You clearly are just don't want to do them. So guess what? Now you're to the hours based. You lost your privileges, your ability to be able to do these on your own and on your own time and of your own freedom. So we've had academic coaches that have made those choices. So those consequences, I guess, of sending things to coaches, whether they met their goals or not, that's completely up to them. We know that really punishment running can't be used, that sort of stuff. But what coaches do with it when we send it to them, that is completely up to them. But for us, the consequence is if you are a part caseload, you're still on caseload. We still need to continue to work with you. But if you're in our study hall system and you were goals based and you have had multiple opportunities, then you are adjusted and shifted to the hours-based system.
Alex, this will be our last question. How would you suggest modifying this program for a staff of 2 and a GA, or in general, just maybe a small staff?
I think it's something that if you're not already doing it in your caseload, I really think it is something that's a place to start. Starting it with smaller teams, I think also would be great to kind of figuring it out, because then it does at least reduce traffic in that way. It's something, again, that we're running into and trying to figure out again. And really, there's my email there. Please email me if you have suggestions where we have a staff of 5 with no GA, where it's tough when you have 100 to 150 student athletes and sorting through those every week. I would suggest really implementing it with your low risk athletes first on the caseload level, but then also really pushing it to your high risk, but then really push it to your low risk student athletes that could already handle this on their own, as long as you introduce the system and kind of let them go off. And obviously, if they prove that they're unable to, then put them back into the hours-based system.
With that final question, Alex, do you have any final comments before we wrap up today's presentation?
No, I really appreciate everyone taking the time to listen to me. It's been a long journey, and it's been something where I am so lucky to be in this profession. I made the jump from high school to college, and the fact that people actually signed up to listen to this when I'm still relatively new to the field and still learning is awesome. And again, I encourage anybody to reach out, collaborate, talk to me more about the system, because it is a work in progress, but I truly hope that people are able to get something from this and hopefully implement it at their universities.
On behalf of N4A and its leadership, thank you for taking time out of your day to join today's presentation. Please have a great day, everyone.